We are learning the Sichaa, Parshas Nitzovim, the first Sichaa, in Chelek Yudal, volume 14 of Likutei Sichos. The Sichaa is on the pasuk in this week's Parsha, Perik Chav Tes, pasuk Beit Chav. The Hivdili Hashem L'Ra, Kechal Olei Sabris Aksuva B'Sefer HaTorah Hazeh. And Rashi quotes the last words of the pasuk, Haksuva B'Sefer HaTorah Hazeh. This that is written on this in this Sefer Torah. And Rashi explains as follows. In Hebrew, nouns also have a difference in how we use them in male or female, masculine or feminine language. The word hazeh is masculine, lashon zachar. And Rashi asks, but earlier in Parshas Kisavai, we had a pasuk that says, B'Sefer HaTorah hazois. In this Torah, using the word zois, which is feminine. So why in this pasuk do we use the word for Sefer Torah hazeh? In other words, that the word Sefer Torah is masculine, but in Parshas Kisavai it says Sefer HaTorah hazois, that the Sefer Torah is feminine, and therefore Rashi answers that, and he quotes which pasuk he's talking about. Gam kol choli v'chol maka v'gomer, and then he answers that the word HaTorah is lashon nekeva, the word Sefer is lashon zachar. Sefer hazeh, HaTorah hazois. This Torah in feminine, this Sefer is masculine. But then the question is, why? Which one is it? Sefer HaTorah hazois or Sefer HaTorah hazeh is the same words. So Rashi explains that here we take a look at the trup. And the trop in how we read the words is very telling. And this is in general a very good area where we can see how careful we have to be in trop, not just in laning, but also when we read the words. And you can use the trop as an indication of how to place words together. In the trop, there's the amercha and a tipcha, which look like a comma. One of them is the same like our comma. In other words, facing the word that it's on, and the other one is a comma facing the other direction. So Rashi says like this: the tipcha, which is a regular comma as we know it, is, in other words, going like this, comma. It depends where that word is. In other words, if we have a tipcha mercha, meaning that the after the word Sefer has a tipcha and the word Torah has a mercha, meaning that the word you're separating them, it's going that way. Sefer, almost comma, HaTorah hazeh, then it would be HaTorah hazois, because we're separating the word Sefer and Torah. So in Parshas Kisavai, or as Rashi calls it here, the parsha of the klolos, the parsha where we have the rebuke, the klolos, the tipcha is under the word Sefer, and so therefore the word Sefer separated from HaTorah hazois. The word Torah, as we said before, is feminine, so it says zois. But in this week's parsha, in Parshas Nitzovim, the pasuk that we're talking about, the pasuk said that the tipcha is under the word HaTorah. In other words, that the words Sefer HaTorah go together. So therefore, the word Hazeh goes back to the word Sefer. We're not separating the word Sefer and Torah. So therefore, the word Sefer Torah is connected. It goes like this, where the Sefer Torah is coming. The word Sefer HaTorah goes together, and therefore we follow the word Hazeh goes back to the word Sefer, which, as we said before, is masculine. So in short, Rashi is telling us when it says the word Sefer is lashon zachar, the word Torah is lashon nekeva. If the word Sefer and Torah are separated by the trop, then the word hazois or hazeh, this goes on to the word Torah, and therefore it has to be in lashon nekeva. If the word Sefer and Torah are together, so then we put the word hazeh or hazois, this, together with Sefer, and therefore it's masculine, and we work with the word hazeh. The Rebbe asks multiple questions on this Rashi. Number one, as we've seen many times, the Rebbe is very particular that Rashi is quoting the words from the pasuk that are relevant to his commentary. Why does he also quote the word haksuva in explaining these words? This discussion is really about the word Sefer HaTorah hazois, or hazeh, Sefer HaTorah hazeh. Number two, when Rashi quotes the earlier pasuk, he also says which pasuk we're talking about. And he says, we're talking about Sefer Torah Hazeh, in which we say, Gam kol choli v'chol maka. Why does Rashi have to tell us those words? L'mayla, earlier. We just learned it, last week's parsha. We should remember what we learned, and we should be able to find it easily. Third, Rashi quotes the pasuk very funny from Parshas Kisavei. He first says, earlier we said Sefer Torah Hazeh, in which pasuk, Gam kol choli v'chol maka. In other words, he brings the second half of the pasuk before the first half of the pasuk. If he does find it necessary to quote which pasuk we're talking about in Parshas Kisavei, so he should have quoted the pasuk as it stated. Gam kacholi v'chol makachul they're not written in this pasuk. Why does he mix the pasuk up if he's quoting it? Fourth, as we said before, Rashi references Parshas Kisavei as Parshas Haklolis in the second time that he quotes it. First he says earlier, Lamaila, earlier, and then he says in Parshas Haklolis. Why does Rashi call it the second time he's quoting the pasuk as Parshas Haklolis, the parsha of the curses? And in fact, when he comes back to our parsha, he calls it here, Kan. So he could have said Sham or Lamaila the second time as well. And finally, the answer itself. The answer only tells us why the pasuk changes from Hazeh to Hazeh. But the question goes back a step. Why do we make a mercha tipcha? Why is the trop different? Why does the Torah write it in a way that in Parshas Kisavei it's HaTorah Hazeh, and in Parshas Nitzovim it's Sefer Hazeh? In other words, we understand that the grammar follows the trop. But why is the trop different? In other words, there has to be a reason why the Torah says Hazeh and Hazeh, or Sefer HaTorah, or Sefer HaTorah Hazeh, differently. And in Ha'ara 8, the Rebbe asks another question. I'm sorry, no, Ha'ara 9, the Rebbe asks another question, which is that Rashi first explains Parshas Kisavei and then explains our parsha. Seemingly, if the commentaries on this parsha, Rashi should have explained our question, our pasuk first. So to answer all these diyukim, all these careful analysis on Rashi, the Rebbe says we have to look at this whole concept of a Sefer Torah Hazeh, Sefer Torah Hazeh from a different angle. What is the more logical one to use? In other words, without looking at the contradiction, Rashi creates a contradiction, but what is the more logical approach? And for that, it would seem that the more logical approach should be that the word HaTorah is closer to the word Hazeh or Hazeh, so it should read Hazeh. Which is why in Parshas Kisavei, it makes sense that the pasuk says Sefer HaTorah Hazeh. In other words, that our parsha, where it says Sefer HaTorah Hazeh, is a little odd, because the word right before Hazeh is HaTorah, which we said before is feminine. So if that's the case, the Torah should have lechatchila used always the word Hazeh. And so therefore, even before we approach that, Rashi right away quotes the word Haksuva, with which he's already answering why our pasuk says Hazeh. And that is because Haksuva means that is written. That is written in the Sefer, which means that the primary word here is Sefer. We're writing in the Sefer. Which Sefer? The Sefer HaTorah. So being that the pasuk's talking about Haksuva, it's talking about what's being written in the Sefer, in the book, it's understood that the primary word is Sefer, and that's why it says Hazeh. And that's why Rashi quotes the word Haksuva in the Divrei HaMaskal, to tell us that the reason why it says Hazeh is very understood in this pasuk, because it says Haksuva, that's being written in this Sefer, which Sefer is secondary to the primary element, this Sefer in masculine. But then Rashi says, but if we look earlier in Parshas Kisavei, over there it says also the word Kasuv, Aksuva, that's written, Akasuv, that's written, in this Sefer HaTorah, but it says Hazeh. So why earlier, when it speaks about being written in a book, or actually not written in a book? Does it say Hazois, and here it says Sefer, here it says Hazeh? So now it becomes a contradiction. And so for this, Rashi answers that over there, the pasuk, the primary is Torah, and in this pasuk, the primary is Sefer. Why? So Rashi says, because we have to take a look at the context of that pasuk. What is the context of that pasuk? He answers, because that pasuk says, Gam kol choli v'chol maka. And that's how Rashi actually changes the order of the quote of the pasuk. Because first he's asking the question from the pasuk. Why in that pasuk does it say the Sefer HaTorah Hazeh? In our pasuk it says Sefer Torah Hazeh. Rashi answers the reason is because in this parsha the main thing is the word Sefer. In that parsha the main thing is the word Torah. Why? Because in that Torah it says Gam kol choli v'chol makash lekasav b'Sefer Torah Hazeh. Meaning that what is the context of that pasuk? The context of that pasuk is the klolis. Where Hashem is telling the Yidden all the bad things that will happen to them if they don't follow the ways of the Torah. And he's saying that not only what is written here, but even what is not written here is going to chas v'shalom come to you if you don't do what's right. In other words, the emphasis over here is not what's written, but the emphasis over here is the Torah, the Hayrah, the lesson that we need to take. When you're trying to warn someone of the difficulties that will come, they have to be warned in the strongest way. And that's what the word Torah means. The word Torah means to teach someone. We're trying to teach someone. We're trying to teach someone and warn someone about how strict and how careful they have to be in fulfilling Torah mitzvahs. Because if not, chas v'shalom, all the klalos that will come their way. So the Torah is emphasizing that not only what we're writing here, but also what's not written here should be learned and taken to heart to make sure that you learn Torah and do mitzvahs properly. So yes, it says hakosef b'sefer, or more accurately, shaloi kosef b'sefer, what's not written in this pasuk or in this sefer. But the main thing that the Torah is emphasizing here is the fact that it's a Torah, that it's a hirah, that it's a lesson that we need to take to heart. And that means that the primary context of the pasuk there is the word Torah. The lesson that the Torah is giving us that one needs to learn to take to heart about the klolos, about the curses. And therefore, the Torah is emphasizing, being that the emphasis of the word Torah, so it says Hazois, Lashon Nekeva. But in our pasuk, we're talking about a pasuk that Hashem says, Chol olos b'saksu v'sefer Torah. That's talking about the general idea of writing something in a sefer. It's not the parsha of the Teichecha. So therefore, in our pasuk, the emphasis is on the word sefer, on the word writing in the sefer, and therefore this pasuk, we look at it as a sefer lashon zachar. Torah is just a description which sefer we're talking about. However, the bottom line is we have to, in the grammar, we have to be able to understand how this works, because as we said earlier, that if the main thing is the word sefer, but which word is the word hazeh next to? It's next to the word Torah. So therefore, Rashi answers that the Trop helps us out with that. By making a tipcha mercha, by separating the word sefer from HaTorah, that's showing that the main thing is HaTorah Hazeh. By putting the two words together, Sefer HaTorah, that makes the word Torah just as a description of the word Sefer, allowing us to now see the word Sefer as the primary word, and even though it says the word Torah between Sefer and Hazeh, but it's only a secondary word to the primary Sefer. That's why Rashi has to teach us how it works within this parsha. And as we said before, Rashi emphasizes that the word is the parsha haklala. As we said before, to teach us that it's the word, that the fact that it's the parsha haklala is the parsha that teaches us about the rebuke of the Yidden, which makes the word Torah the main word, the lesson that we're trying to learn. Explain why the word Torah becomes primary in that pasuk. So to summarize the Pshuta Shel Mikra in this Rashi, we have our parsha where it says Sefer Torah Hazeh. We have Parshas Kisavei where it says Sefer HaTorah Hazeh. Seemingly the primary word is Sefer, because Haksuva, that's being written in the Sefer. The word Torah is just a description of which Sefer it is. However, in the Klales, in Parshas HaKlales, the main thing is HaTorah, a lesson for us. And what's being written, in fact, the Pasuk is telling us that the lesson is so important that both what's written and what's not written has to be taken to lesson. Or better said, what's written and what's alluded to in the writings has to be taken to heart. And so therefore, the main thing is the word Torah, so therefore it says Hazois, the feminine. And the trop allows it to be done that way by separating the word Sefer not Torah with the trop. However, in our parsha, which we have no reason to say that the main thing is the word Torah, the main thing is the Sefer, Haksuva b'Sefer, it's written in the Sefer. Torah is just a description of which Sefer. So therefore, by putting the trop, this word Sefer and Torah together, so then the primary word remains Sefer, and therefore we go with the masculine Sefer Hazeh. And now we have a lengthy Yene Shel Torah, the Hira, Api Chassidus, and this Rashi. Torah is one big Torah. We have Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Peh, 613 mitzvahs, many lessons, but ultimately it all comes down to Torah Achas, the one Torah. One unit that the Eibusha gave is Torah. In fact, when it comes to mitzvahs too, although we have 613 mitzvahs, and there's times that we say that this kalas v'chamuris, the stricter mitzvahs and more lenient mitzvahs, but when we've come to fulfill the Eibishter's mitzvahs, we have to remember that all of Torah and all of mitzvahs is chachmasiv and it's the Eibishter's will. And in Ratzon and in the will of Hashem, all the mitzvahs are equal. As explained many times in Chassidus, that in Ratzon, in a will, everything is the same. And therefore, when it comes to fulfilling a mitzvah, Yid has to remember that the most important part of doing the mitzvah is because that's the Ratzon Hashem, and that's the Ratzon of his neshama, of what he wants to do to come closer to Hashem. As a result, we have to understand that when the Torah tells us to do mitzvahs, the Torah is not just telling us to fulfill the mitzvahs, but the Torah is also reminding us that the mitzvahs have to be done in the most positive way, in the best way, which is with complete bittul to Hashem, our Ratzon, for the Eibishter's Ratzon. And in a sense, that's what the Pasuk says, Im b'chukoisai telechu, referring to all the mitzvahs as chukim, meaning the mitzvahs that are we only can connect with them as a Ratzon Hashem. And then if we fulfill the mitzvahs in this way, the Pasuk continues, V'sati yishmei chavitam, will have all the brachas that Hashem gives us, and chas v'shalom not, the Pasuk continues with the klalos. So now, the Rebbe is saying we could take this a step further. That it's not only the Pasuk's telling us that we need to do mitzvahs. The Pasuk's telling us that we have to remember that there's no separation between Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh, between one mitzvah and another mitzvah. And only then, when we approach the Torah mitzvahs with the proper attitude, that all of Torah mitzvahs is the Ratzon Hashem, one and the same, then we are connecting with Hashem properly and we receive Hashem's brachas. And that's what Rashi is telling us in this parsha, in Parshas HaKlales of Parshas Kisaveh. That when is the Parshas Klolos, when does a Klola Chas v'Shalom come to Yid? When the word Sefer and the word Torah become separated. Sefer, Torah Shebiksav. Torah, the lessons, the Torah Shebal Peh, become separated, then Chas v'Shalom a Yid has Klolos. And why is it that a Yid Chas v'Shalom separates the two? Because he's lacking the proper Kabbalah sale of connecting the two together. However, if someone recognizes that he has Mesiras Nefesh, in other words, he's connecting to Hashem, as the Pasuk says, Hashem lo yikasef b'Sefer Torah. This that is not written into the Torah. The Rebbe says the deeper meaning of that Pasuk is the things that are beyond what's written in the Torah. If a Yid connects with what's beyond what's written in the Torah, the Mesiras Nefesh, the Kabbalah sale, which, as we know, Chassidus says is strong, is beyond Torah mitzvahs, the Mesiras Nefesh that a Yid has. So then, when a Yid feels that he has the Mesiras Nefesh for the Eibishter, that he goes beyond what's written, so then he has the strength of doing Torah mitzvahs properly. This connects also, Parshas Nitzovim is always read the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. As we're always well aware, that the fact that the primary avoid of Rosh Hashanah is Kabbalah Seil, Malchus Shemayim, Mesiras Nefesh for the entire year, and in general the avoid of Tshuva, which also Tshuva, as explained by Chassidus, is higher than limitations and higher than Torah. And that's why Torah, as Tshuva, has the ability to rectify this that we messed up in Torah. And being that Chodesh Elul in general, Parshas Nitzovim, the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah in particular, is the time when we focus on our Avodas HaTshuva, as explained in detail in Parshas Nitzovim, the multiple psukim that speak about Tshuva, and certainly also this Rashi is alluding to this concept that a Yid has to have Asher Loi Kosov B'Sefer HaTorah, that there should be no separation between the word HaSefer and HaTorah, no separation between the Torah Shabbat and Torah Shabbat Peh. There should be no separation between mitzvahs. We should be on the level Asher Loi Kosov. This is that beyond that's written, beyond the Mesiras Nefesh, Kabbalah Seil and Tshuva, that is higher than Seichel, in which we connect. But yet, it's not in Parshas Kisavim. It's Dafka in Parshas Nitzovim, but also in Parshas Nitzovim, only Rashi writes this. When we read Parshas Nitzovim, the Psukim itself talk about the mitzvah of Tshuva. But Rashi, in Torah Shabbat Peh of Parshas Nitzovim, Rashi alludes to the Aveda of Tshuva. Whereas in Parshas Kisavim, over there, the Pasuk clearly speaks about the Sefer HaTorah going together. And the reason for this is because in Parshas HaKlolos, the parsha that speaks about the klala, about the negativity, over there we see the negative. It doesn't spell out clearly that the Sefer and Torah go together in the sense that it's written out. It's only alluded to in the Torah Shabbat and the fact the way the Trop writes them, because even though it's there, but when there's Ra, we have to always remember that on the surface we could see Ra. We could see the negative. But what's really there behind is that the purpose of the negative is that we could transform it to Kedusha. Kol, Paul, Hashem, L'maneu, everything Hashem does, the Gam L'Rasha, even the negative, L'yoyim Ra, is to change the Ra into Yoyim, to change the negative into day, as Altein explains in Tanya. Perek Chav Zayin in this pasuk. So therefore, in Torah Shabbat, meaning where we have it the way Hashem sees it, we see clawless, we see negativity, but alluded to there is that the purpose of this negativity is for us to transform it, to bring the Sefer and the Torah together, that we shouldn't have any separation. However, in Parshas Nitzovim, where we already have the Aveda of Tshuva, over here, in Torah Shabbat Peh, Rashi already explains in Parshas Nitzovim very clearly that this Aveda of Tshuva is in order for us to bring the Torah and the Zois together, the Aveda of Tshuva of keeping the Torah and the Zois all in one. And this is what we read the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah, is that Hashem should help us to recognize that we should do tshuva properly, which according to Torah, when a Yid does tshuva, he becomes immediately a tzaddik gomer. And then, take it from a yad, will also be zeicha, that atem Nitzovim yem kulchem lefnei Hashem lekechem, that will all stand upright, as we have, Hashem gives us a ksiva, a chsiva teva, and a shana teva mesukah, begashmias uberach.